Hey people, it's me again. So, anyways, I talked about this sort of thing um, a few times on my channel, you know, as far as that goes, but it's the Strausse-Howe generation theory. So, it comes from this book that was published back in '97 called the Fourth Turning, and that was the thing there. And I think what was happening in the last 5 years could be considered like the fourth turning at that point, as far as what is going on in terms of the different generational shifts of that sort. Especially what has happened in the last 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, so on and so forth. Yeah. And like how each different generation, when they go through a certain stage of life, there's this sort of shift in things. And so each generation has like these different archetypes. So it's like the hero, the nomad, the artist, and then the prophet, and those are like the different archetypes of that sort. And then hero is the millennial generation and the GI generation, because that generation had grew up on shaky ground and then had come of age during the hard times, and then it's like midlife in the more stable period, and then there's like the outer years in this sort of the more prosperous kind of period of that sort. And it goes into the different periods. There's like the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and the crisis period. And the perfect example of it was like post WW2 America, the high period. Then there's the awakening period, which was like the 60s and 70s counterculture. And then the unraveling was like the 80s and the 90s. And then the crisis period would be, the aughts up until now, I think. And it was something like the artist, I think, was the archetype was the baby boomers, because they were the ones that grew up in the high period, coming of age in the awakening, midlife and the unraveling period, crisis in the elder years. The nomad is I think that's supposed to be I think the nomad was the one that's supposed to be the archetype for the Gen Xers, because the Gen Xers grew up in the awakening period, because latchkey kids and all this, and then it was like the whole thing that when they came of age during the 90s, the being like the lazy slackers and all that, and then the aughts being midlife, and then now elder years here in the 2020s and 30s, so that's something I have to kind of point out here. And then when it comes to I think the other one was the prophet, but I'm probably getting it mixed around here, because then the prophet archetype is supposed to be the ones that were born in the crisis period. So it would be Gen Z, but also what is that generation called again? The silent generation? It's Gen Z and silent generation, where they grew up in the crisis period, come of age in the high period, and then it's midlife in the awakening period, and then it's elder years and the unraveling period. You know, so I think that's pretty much what I would cover at that point there. But it's like, when you look at, in the grand scheme of things, how the different archetypes kind of play out, and as far as what was going on in the last 20 years, the 30 years, and so on and so forth at that point. And then for me, it's like I fall under like late Gen Z, early millennial, because I'm 43 and I'm going to be 44 in about another, couple more, couple more months at that point, because my birthday's in June, and so it's one of those little things there. So considering all that, I mean, there's just a lot that I have to kind of mention at that point. But still, I mean, there are like criticisms when it comes to the whole Strausse-Howe generation theory, because Adam Conover, from like Adam Ruins Everything and College Humor at that point, was one of the biggest critics of the Strauss-Howe generation theory, but still there is like similarities of how different archetypes over the years at that point, but still. So, anyways, I guess that's probably it. So, talk to you guys later.